Elias Thorne was used to working in the vibrant silence of the engineering deck. He preferred the silence, really. A silence filled only by the constant thrum of the Odyssey's energy converters and the metallic click of his own tools. He was an analog mechanic in a digital world. While the rest of the crew relied on AI diagnostics and nano-repairers, Elias trusted his hands. He could identify the vibration of a bearing about to fail, just by the feeling that traveled up the handle of a screwdriver pressed against the engine housing. It was a dying art, and it was why he was here, light years away from anything resembling his old life on Earth. The Odyssey was an interstellar research ark, a bridge between humanity and the new species the galaxy offered. For Elias, it was simply a place to hide, where machines made more sense than people. His work was predictable. The relationships with the various alien species aboard, however, were anything but. One of Cynthians was an enigma. Incredibly advanced, they operated their technology not through buttons or screens, but through psionic and bioorganic interfaces. To them, a machine was something to be persuaded, not fixed, and among them was Lyra Venn. She was the first empath assigned to the Odyssey, tasked with understanding the baffling mess of human emotions. Her appearance was, for lack of a better word, unsettling. She stood well over 7 feet tall, with skin that wasn't a solid color, but a pearlescent opal that shifted softly with the ambient light, and, as Elias had begun to notice, with her mood. Her eyes were large and liquid, a deep amethyst hue, and seemed to register everything with uncomfortable intensity. She had become a semi-regular presence in engineering, observing him. It was on a quiet afternoon that she approached, moving with a fluid grace that seemed to ignore gravity. Elias Thorne, her voice sounded. It wasn't exactly speech. It had a melodic quality, almost like a chord being struck. "May I inquire about your process?" Elias was arm-deep in the access panel of a plasma regulator. He sighed, pulled his arm out, and wiped the grease on a rag that had once been white. "I suppose so, Lyra. What is it now?" "I have observed you for 3.7 cycles," she said, tilting her head. The luster of her skin shifted to a soft teal, which he had learned to associate with analytical curiosity. "You interface with the vessel in a way our records cannot explain. The other humans use the terminals, they issue commands. You touch the machines." She pointed with a long, elegant finger at the tool in his hand. It was an old-fashioned torque wrench, a museum piece he had fabricated himself. "Especially with that implement. You apply it, and the machine changes its operational state. But there is no power interface, no data transmission. I detect no psionic waves. How do you command the machine with this object?" Elias blinked, looking down at the torque wrench. "Command? I don't command, I tighten. It's a bolt." "Bolt?" She repeated the word, savoring it. "I consulted the database. It is a helical friction-based fastening device. But your method of application is what intrigues me. It seems inefficient. And yet you seem to derive satisfaction from the process." Elias felt a flush creep up his neck. "I don't know about satisfaction. It's just work. You turn this and it tightens that. It's just physical force." Lyra's amethyst eyes widened slightly. Force, physical, direct. She seemed to process this. "On Synthos, we shape energy. We convince structures to align. The idea of applying brute force in this manner, it is strange. It is almost violent." "Well, sometimes a stuck bolt needs a little violence," Elias muttered, turning back to the panel. "I wish to try," she said suddenly. Elias froze. "Try what?" "The process. I wish to apply brute force. I need to understand the sensation you derive from it. It is fundamental to my understanding of your species. You are so physical." Elias looked at her delicate fingers, and then at the heavy steel torque wrench. The idea of her trying to use a hand tool was so absurd he almost laughed. "Lyra, you don't... That's not how it works. You could get hurt." "My biological structure is resilient," she assured him, a new edge to her melodic voice. I must catalog this sensation, the connection you have with the tool. Please. Sighing, Elias realized this was a battle he wouldn't win. All right, but it's not a connection, it's just leverage. Elias wiped the handle of the tool and offered it to her. Handle first. Fine. See that access bolt there? The hexagonal one? It needs a quarter turn clockwise. Lyra took the tool. Her hands wrapped around the metal, and she held it as if it were a delicate religious artifact. She positioned herself in front of the panel and, with surprising grace, fitted the head of the wrench onto the bolt. Then she stopped. I am connected, she announced, closing her eyes. Her opalescent skin began to pulse with a faint, internal light. Elias frowned. What are you doing? I am requesting the bolt to turn, she said, her voice tight with concentration. I am applying a field of persuasion. Elias couldn't help it, he snorted. Lyra, it's not a dog, you can't request it, you have to force it. Her eyes snapped open, glowing with frustration. But it does not respond. The tool is not amplifying my intent. The tool doesn't amplify anything. It focuses the force from your arm, Elias said, feeling like a reluctant teacher. Look, you have to. Like this. Hesitantly, he placed his hand over hers on the wrench's handle. Her skin was cool to the touch, or perhaps just a different temperature than his, and smooth as polished silk. Lyra stiffened instantly at the contact. Is this a necessary protocol? She asked, her voice rising a single tone. It is, Elias said, ignoring how strange this was. Now, pull. No, don't pull straight. Turn your body. Use your weight. He applied light pressure. Lyra resisted for a second, then abruptly she understood. She threw her tall body into the motion, and under their combined hands, the bolt gave way with a sharp, satisfying squeal. Lyra gasped. She dropped the tool as if it had shocked her. The resistance and then the release. It was so abrupt. That's called breaking the torque, Elias said, catching the tool before she dropped it. No, she said, looking at her own hands. Her skin was now a flush of excited rose gold. It was immediate. When we use our interfaces, there is a negotiation with the energy, a flow. This was a fracture, an imposition of will upon matter. It is intoxicating. Before Elias could reply, she snatched the tool back. Again. Lyra, wait, that one's already tight. But she was already moving to the next bolt, the same determined glow in her eyes. She fixed the wrench head and, this time, put all of her lanky, unpracticed body weight into the move. There was a sharp, loud crack. It was not the bolt. It was the joint coupling beneath it. An immediate hiss echoed out, and a jet of superheated coolant steam exploded from the panel, firing directly where they stood. Look out! Elias yelled, grabbing Lyra by the waist and hauling her backward, tackling her to the metal deck just as the scalding vapor filled the space they had occupied seconds before. Alarms began to blare. Elias lay on the floor for a second, heart pounding, the surprisingly dense form of the alien half on top of him. She scrambled to her feet awkwardly, her skin now a pale, shocked gray. A failure has occurred, she stated, looking at the now gushing steam. Elias got to his feet, coughing. You think? You cracked the joint seal. I applied the brute force, she said, looking confused, as if she had followed the instructions perfectly. Elias stalked to the emergency cutoff panel and slammed his hand on the button, silencing the alarms and closing the coolant line. The hissing died to a drip. He turned to her, expecting to feel anger, but all he felt was an amused exhaustion. Yeah, you did. Turns out there's a difference between brute force and guerrilla force. You have to feel it. Know when it's enough. Lyra's amethyst eyes studied him. So, it is not just force. It is sensitivity. A new variable. I apologize for the coolant loss and equipment damage. Don't worry about it. Elias sighed, grabbing a sealing kit. I've seen human cadets do worse, but maybe next time let's start with something less pressurized. She nodded, though her eyes remained fixed on the broken joint, an almost childlike expression of fascination on her face. This had been her first, and very literal, impact on the physical world. In the following weeks, Lyra became Elias's unofficial apprentice. The incident with the coolant joint, rather than discouraging her, had only deepened her resolve. She wanted to understand the human ethos of physicality. Elias, to his own surprise, didn't mind. Her questions forced him to articulate things he had always known by instinct. "Why do you use this graphite-based lubricant instead of the synthetic silicone gel?" she would ask. "Because the silicone is clean, but it can't take high heat. The graphite is dirty, but it's honest. It works," he'd reply. What is honest about a carbon compound? Their interactions were no longer limited to engineering. One day she found him in the mess hall during his break. Elias was eating what the ship's food synthesizer called a turkey sandwich. Lyra sat down across from him, which prompted several human crew members to quickly change tables. She simply observed as he ate. "Elias Thorne," she said finally, her melodic voice cutting through the mess hall's murmur. He finished chewing. "Yes, Lyra? I am analyzing your fuel intake process. It is disturbing." Elias put the sandwich down. "Disturbing? It's a sandwich. You are destroying complex organic matter with your teeth," she explained, her skin shifting to a pale green of mild revulsion. "And then you insert it inside your main body cavity to be dissolved by acids." "It's called eating," Elias said defensively. "How do you get energy?" "We attune to the ship's energy field when in our quarters," she said. "Or if biological matter is required, we absorb nutrients via osmosis through our skin in a biomass bath. But this method of yours, putting dead matter inside you, it is so risky and intimate." Elias looked at the remainder of his sandwich and suddenly lost his appetite. "Well, when you put it that way, I'd never really thought about it. That is what I find so fascinating," she continued, leaning forward. "You humans are constantly at war with your own environment. You consume it, you force it. You live in a state of constant friction, and yet, you seem to enjoy it." It was this conversation that led to the next lesson, the hoverbike. It was Elias's only personal property on the ship, an ancient planetary scout bike he was rebuilding. It was parked in a corner of the bay. Lyra had been eyeing it for days. "That machine," she said one afternoon, pointing. "I have seen it in your entertainment archives. It is a joy vehicle." "It's a transport vehicle," Elias corrected. "But yeah, some find it fun." "It operates on vibration," she stated. Elias stopped polishing a manifold. "No, it operates on low-altitude repulsors. The internal combustion engine is what vibrates. It's a side effect, an old design. But the humans who use it in your archives, they seem to seek the vibration," she insisted. "They position themselves deliberately to maximize contact with the machine. They sit astride it." "I do not understand." "Vibration is chaotic sensory data. It is noise. Why would you seek noise?" Elias laughed. "Lyra, it's not noise. It's feedback. It's the feel of the road. It's how you know the machine is alive under you." "Alive," she repeated, her amethyst eyes fixed on him. "Like the coolant joint was alive? No, this is different." Elias felt his face flush, realizing how strange this sounded. "Look, it's hard to explain. It's about control, about moving with the machine, not just in it." "I want to feel it," she said with the same determination as before. "I want to feel the feedback." Elias hesitated. The last time she'd tried to use a tool, she'd nearly steamed them both, but she looked so hungry for understanding. "All right," he sighed, "but I'm driving. You ride pillion, and for God's sake, do not try to help." He fired up the engine. The ancient machine roared to life with a low, guttural thrum, so different from the Odyssey's silent hums. The whole bike shivered with contained energy. "It is loud," Lyra said, her skin shifting to an anxious yellow. "And it smells." "That's called exhaust," Elias said, grinning. "Get on." She mounted behind him awkwardly, her long limbs unsure where to go. "Where do I hold?" "My waist, and hold on tight." She placed her hands hesitantly on his waist. Her fingers were cool through his jumpsuit. Elias gently goosed the throttle, and the bike floated a few inches off the deck. He took a slow loop around the cargo bay. At first, Lyra was rigid as a statue. Then, as he took a wider turn, he felt her shift. The vibration of the engine resonated through both of them. He could feel her trembling, or maybe it was the bike. "The noise," she said, her melodic voice almost a shout over the engine. "It is everywhere. It is not clean data. It is chaotic. I feel it in my bones." "That's the point," Elias shouted back, taking the loop a little faster. He felt her laugh. It wasn't like a human laugh, but a series of melodic notes that seemed to vibrate against his back. She tightened her grip on his waist, no longer hesitant, but with force. When he finally pulled to a stop and killed the engine, the ensuing silence was deafening. Lyra slid off the bike, her legs visibly shaking. Her pearlescent skin was flushed a deep rose, and she was breathing hard. "That," she panted, "was the most illogical, terrifying thing I have ever experienced. It was wonderful." Elias couldn't help but laugh. "Welcome to the physical world, Lyra." She looked at him, and for the first time, the intensity in her eyes wasn't analytical. It was something else. I understand. The joy. It is the joy of losing control while still being in control. It is a paradox. The hoverbike experience changed something between them. Lyra stopped treating Elias as an experiment and started treating him as an enigma. And Elias, who had spent years building walls around himself, found she was bypassing them with relentless curiosity. She began asking questions not about machines, but about humans. "Elias," she approached him one day in the corridor. "I observed Lieutenant Kova and the chief engineer. Her father unit had expired. The chief then applied pressure to her entire torso with his arms, and the lieutenant leaked fluid from her eyes. But her body chemistry indicated comfort. It is a paradox." Elias stopped, knowing exactly what she was talking about. "It's called a hug, Lyra, and crying is normal when you're sad. But the hug? Why apply pressure? What is its tactical function?" "It's not tactical," Elias said, feeling awkward. "It's to show support, to make the person feel like they're not alone. But she is not alone. The ship has 800 crew." "Not like that," he tried. "It's about physical connection, proximity." Lyra processed this. "On Synthos," she said slowly, "full-body physical contact is rare. It is reserved for fusion, when two minds must become one for a complex task, or for the transference of consciousness before death. To do it for support. It is a very strange expenditure of energy." "We're strange," Elias said. "Yes," she agreed without malice. "You are. Elias, can you demonstrate the protocol?" The corridor suddenly felt very small. "Demonstrate? A hug?" "I must understand the syntax," she said with complete seriousness. "I cannot advise my people on an alliance with a species whose basic comfort rituals I cannot catalog. I must feel the data." Elias looked up and down the corridor. It was empty. "All right, but this is weird to do analytically." "All interaction is analytical until it is not," she replied. Elias sighed. "Okay, come here." She stepped closer. He awkwardly lifted his arms and put them around her torso. It was like hugging a tall, slightly cool statue. He gave a light, awkward squeeze. "This is it," he muttered. "This is the thing." Lyra remained perfectly still for several seconds. Elias began to feel ridiculous and was about to let go when her own slender arms came up and, hesitantly, wrapped around him. Her touch was light, almost weightless. Then, just as she had with the torque wrench, she seemed to understand. She applied pressure. Elias stiffened. Unlike his awkward squeeze, hers was complete, firm. She was holding him with surprising strength, pinning him against her body. He could feel the faint, rhythmic thrum he now knew was her circulatory system. "Your heartbeat," she whispered, her melodic voice vibrating against his chest. "It is accelerated, and your body temperature is rising. Is this a stress reaction?" "No," Elias said, his voice a bit choked. It's a reaction. It's normal. There is no data exchange," she murmured, more to herself. "No psionic merge. It is just pressure and warmth. There is no logic." She held him a fraction tighter. "But it is ordered. The noise of the universe seems to lessen." She held him for an agonizingly long moment before finally releasing him and stepping back. Her skin had the faintest lavender tint. "I understand," she said, though she looked shaken. "It is not about support. It is anchoring. You humans use one another to remember that you are real." Elias had no answer for that. He just nodded, feeling as if the deck had been pulled out from under him. That hug changed the balance. The line between observer and participant had dissolved. Lyra became quieter, her questions less frequent, but far more piercing. Elias, for his part, found himself looking for her in engineering, missing her melodic, inquisitive presence when she wasn't there. He, who had come to space to flee connections, had become the focus of an alien trying to dissect them. One night he was working late, diagnosing a lag in the warp drive spool-up. Engineering was dark save for the light of his work lamp. Elias. He turned. Lyra was standing in the shadows, almost invisible until the light hit her. "You scared me," he said, putting a hand to his heart. "I did not intend to," she said softly. "I have a final query, one that my analysis cannot resolve." He put his tools down, giving her his full attention. "What is it?" She moved closer, her opalescent skin reflecting the single lamp. "I have learned of force. I have learned of ingestion. I have learned of joy and anchoring. But there is one human protocol that defies all logic, one I have observed but cannot model. And that would be?" "The kiss," she said. The silence in the engineering bay became absolute. "From a biological standpoint," she continued, her voice low and analytical, "it is a disaster. It is a direct exchange of microbes and fluids in an ingestion portal. It is an infection risk with no nutritional benefit. From a social standpoint, it is worse. I have seen humans start conflicts over it and end them the same way. It is the most illogical, vulnerable act your species practices." "Lyra," he started, his throat dry. "I have a hypothesis," she interrupted him, taking one more step. She was close now. Close enough for him to feel the slight coolness radiating from her. "I have analyzed all other rituals. All of them at their core are about control, controlling a tool, controlling a vehicle, controlling grief through anchoring. But this act, I believe, is about surrendering control. It is your final admission that logic has failed." She looked up at him, her amethyst eyes no longer analytical, but filled with an emotion he couldn't name. "My mission is to understand you," she whispered. "But I cannot. Not without the final data. It is a paradox I cannot solve. Alone." Elias looked at this brilliant, glowing creature, this being of pure logic who had traveled light years only to collide with the most illogical thing in the universe, human emotion. And he realized with a rising dread and a strange sense of relief that he wasn't hiding anymore. He didn't know if she was asking for an experiment or for something else. In that moment, he realized the distinction no longer mattered. He raised his hand, not to a tool, but to her face. Her skin was smooth. "Lyra." She leaned in slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "I need to understand, Elias. He closed his eyes. Me too.